I'm Chance Dorland, and this is The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. And I'm joined now once again by San Antonio Express News court-saying crime reporter Elizabeth Zavala. And Liz, we recently spoke about a 9-year-old murder case that was going to be retried in Bexar County. That has happened, and the results are not what the defendant was hoping for. We'll get to all that in today's episode, but please refresh my memory about the case.
Yes, this was a murder case involving a San Antonio woman who was convicted of soliciting the kidnapping and slaying of her ex-boyfriend in 2010 and sentenced to 70 years in prison in 2012. This is Vanessa Cameron, and she's the daughter of a retired San Antonio police officer. And she was convicted in what was called a failed scheme to collect a hefty life insurance payout by orchestrating the death of her child's father via bus driver Samuel Allen Johnson Jr. Now, Vanessa Cameron was actually granted a new trial after the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled that her constitutional right to a public trial was violated at the first trial when her relatives were not able to fit in a packed courtroom for jury selection. Well, she was retried last week, and we hear that the jury has come back with a verdict and a sentence in this new trial.
Yes, we'll get to that here in a bit. Let's talk a little bit more about the history of this case. It doesn't just involve Cameron. There are also co-defendants, correct?
Yes. In addition to Vanessa Cameron, there were 3 others who were involved. Her own sister, Susan Marie Sutton, who pleaded guilty to murder and agreed to testify against her sister and her boyfriend and her boyfriend's cousin in exchange for a 25-year sentence. Now, prosecutors alleged at that time that Sutton lured Johnson to a house and told him that she had money for him that her sister Vanessa had owed to him. And once there, Lakeisha Brown told police she hit Johnson in the head with a 2x4 before her cousin, Bernard Brown, who also at that time was Susan Sutton's common-law husband and Vanessa Cameron's brother-in-law, helped handcuff and tie his legs. So that's Susan Marie Sutton, Lakeisha Brown, and her cousin Bernard Brown, who were involved in this particular plot. So Lakeisha Brown said that when Johnson pleaded with them to spare his life, she actually sealed his mouth with duct tape. She also told police that her cousin, Bernard, put Johnson in the trunk of his own car and drove him to Seguin, where Bernard Brown shot Samuel Johnson several times, killing him. Now, Lakeisha Brown also took a plea and received a 25-year prison sentence in exchange for her testimony against the other co-defendants. But in October of 2013, Bernard Brown's attorneys successfully argued that he was framed and he was acquitted of murder by a jury, even though Susan Sutton, his then common-law wife, and his own cousin, Lakeisha Brown, swore under oath that Bernard Brown was the shooter in this case.
And so, of course, not a co-defendant, but really bears mentioning, and we talked about this the last time this came up on the podcast, Vanessa Cameron has a family member with ties to the police department.
Yes, Vanessa Cameron's mother at the time of the killing was a sergeant with the San Antonio Police Department. And she is now retired, but, you know, that is probably one of the most interesting things about this tragic case is, you know, the closeness of, you know, a convicted murderer is related to a retired police officer. I mean, it happens, unfortunately, it happens, but, it doesn't happen very often, and certainly not in Bexar County.
And so finally, we're at this retrial, but this all got started really because of a technicality. And I noted this before. It really does seem like a technicality here.
Yes, well, I mean, their, defense attorneys will argue, especially if this is their clients, that, no, it wasn't a technicality. It's a big deal. And I really don't use that word technicality in this particular setting to be, like to, take away from what happened. Her conviction was overturned because her attorneys argued that her relatives were not allowed in a crowded courtroom during jury selection, which was a violation of her constitutional right to a public trial. So as we discussed before, Chance, this was a very different situation that had not ever, come up before in my reporting that I have found that no one has experienced this before. That during jury selection, the 379th State District Courtroom was so packed with people that Judge Ron Rangel ordered that all of the doors be opened to his courtroom. So when you go into the Cadena Reeves Justice Center's criminal courtrooms, there are two sets of double doors that lead you into the courtroom. And then you have the gallery, and then you have the area that is beyond the gallery. That is the space between the judge and the gallery, which is where the prosecutors and the defense and the jury and, the court reporter and all of these people are. So beyond that, you have the judge's bench. And then in this particular courtroom, Judge Rangel also had to order that the doors behind him that lead actually to his back offices had to be opened as well. So essentially what you had here, Chance, is you basically have stretched the courtroom out into the hallways. But the state argued that while the pool of potential jurors took up all 65 seats inside Judge Rangel's courtroom, accommodations could have been made to seat other spectators. So in the end of this particular part, some, 9 years ago, Vanessa Cameron ended up going to trial and getting a guilty verdict and a 70-year prison term. But on appeal over the fact that her family was not allowed to be in the crowded courtroom or other spectators because there were so many people in there, the higher court actually agreed that she should have a new trial.
And so that's where we are now. This retrial took a little bit over a week. Tell me about it.
Yes, I'm going to tell you about two colleagues of mine, Chance, that were able to pinch hit for me because I was actually gone during this time, but I followed it pretty carefully. So Vanessa Cameron's trial lasted a little over a week. And this time around, the 226th State District Court, with Judge Velia Meza presiding, used the 399th State District Court courtroom, which is Judge Frank Castro's courtroom, but the 399th is the largest criminal courtroom in the Cadena Reeves Justice Center. So once the panel was chosen, the trial was heard actually in Judge Meza's 226th State District Court. So they just used the biggest courtroom that they have to choose this new jury panel. Now, my colleague Bruce Feldcraig covered the first day and noted that what was really interesting in how this trial began was that neither the state nor the defense did any opening statements. They just went right into presenting witnesses and evidence. in the case. So after about a week, the jury came back with another guilty verdict. But after that, during the sentencing phase, this new panel of Bexar County jurors got to hear from Vanessa Cameron herself.
Yeah, I mean, that was my next question. She gave a very interesting twist on what she said happened. She admitted participating in the killing, or at least being involved in what ended up being the death of this man, but she had a very different way that she described it.
Yes, another colleague of mine, Marina Starleaf-Riker, covered the sentencing portion of this two-phase trial. And she wrote that once on the stand, Cameron, who was very emotional, detailed for the jury her role in the killing. She told them that Johnson wanted to die and that he came up with the idea, and that she said, okay, that she agreed with it, and she admitted that she arranged the killing, but that she did not know exactly how the others had planned to actually kill her ex-boyfriend. Vanessa Cameron also described her relationship with Mr. Johnson as one that was toxic, and that included a lot of abuse, and that her ex-boyfriend actually had a lot of ideas about suicide, which led the couple to begin planning various ways to stage his death so she could collect his life insurance policy. And she also told the jury that she felt that Johnson had what she called, and the quote is, the best plan he'd come up with to die, and also told the jury that she discouraged other ways that Johnson had planned to kill himself, specifically because she felt like he likely would, quote, get hurt and not die. So again, she cried during a lot of this testimony, and also admitted to the jury that she wished that she would have, put on the brakes on this plan that went forward. And something else that was very interesting and tragic in this particular case is that Vanessa Cameron told the jury in this trial that before the killing, Johnson apparently decided he didn't want to die after all, but she missed his phone call and the killing went forward.
Yeah, that's a very chilling detail to hear that, Liz. But the jury, they, I guess, were not swayed. Tell me about the sentence. This is actually more of a sentence than what was originally handed to Vanessa Cameron.
Yes, Chance. Last time Vanessa Cameron went on trial and was convicted of murder, she was sentenced to 70 years in prison. But this time around, the Bexar County jury that heard the new trial sentenced Vanessa Cameron to life in prison. And in Texas, life in prison is 60 years. So she will have to serve at least 30 years before she is eligible for parole, though eligibility is not always a certainty. So, but again, I have talked to different lawyers and judges in the courthouse about, what happens when people, they win their appeals and they end up going back to, to be retried or certain other things. I remember we discussed months ago in the Frances Hall case that she was trying to appeal her conviction as well. But if you recall, in that case, she was convicted of murder, but using the sudden passion defense, she was only sentenced to 2 years in prison on the low end of a 2 to 20 year second degree felony. So in that particular case got really close to appeal, but in the end didn't do it. And attorneys in that case had said, she runs the risk of getting a tougher sentence if they do that a second time. But in this particular case, with the violation or the alleged, constitutional violation of, not being able to have, your family in jury selection, who's to say, what's right here? I mean, she did go, she did go from a 70-year prison sentence to a life sentence. But, in the end, you just have to kind of do what you feel, is just.
And then finally, Elizabeth, before we say goodbye, I know that there was a victim impact statement. Tell me about that.
Yes, Chance. Marina had in her story that there were several of Johnson's relatives who could be heard crying and sobbing in the courtroom, lots of hugs going on. One relative called Vanessa Cameron a heartless witch and pointed out that his sons, which one of them belongs to Vanessa Cameron as well, that both of his sons will grow up unnecessarily without him because of her actions. And these victim impact statements, Chance, are always very powerful things. Usually once the jury has decided their sentencing and the judge reads the sentence to the courtroom, the relatives of the victims in the cases are allowed to make what they call a victim impact statement. And they are always very powerful to me. They run from everything from people saying, I wish you luck, I forgive you because that is what I'm supposed to do, what, God tells us what we're supposed to do. And then you get some people where they are still so shaken by their grief that they could curse, they could wail and scream, and in this particular case, it sounds like Johnson's relatives were just very matter of fact about it and just wanted to point out that, there really are no winners here, because even though someone has gone away for life in the killing of this man who was also a father, you have two young children who are going to be growing up without their father.
And thank you to San Antonio Express News courts and crime reporter Elizabeth Zavala for joining me for today's episode of The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you by the law offices of Pat Maloney. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.